Then I'm going to provide a report on the housing provisions in the California budget bill, focusing primarily on what was AB 306 and then came into the budget under a trailer emergency bill slammed through the legislature, AB 130, which provides limitations on what can happen in the way of changes to the green building codes period, between now and 2031. And then after that, if we have any more time, at some point today, we'll have some announcements from climate organizations. I just don't know whether that's going to be before or after Derek gets here and start talking. So with that, Jim, can you give us your thoughts?
Sure. There we go. Thanks, Ken. Sorry, get something here. The One Big Beautiful Act was signed into law on July 4th. It's a pretty complicated treatment of the tax code, and I'm not a tax advisor, so I can only hit some of the highlights as it pertains to green energy issues. Just in a few minutes here, I will briefly cover some of the tax credits that are being eliminated, some that remain with a relatively short shelf life, and a few tax credits that remain in full force for their originally intended lifespan. So gone are the following. EV tax credits for new and used vehicles of up to $7,500 per vehicle, end on September 30th, 2025, here in a couple months. Also gone by September 30th is the $40,000 tax credit for commercial vehicles that weigh in excess of 14,000 pounds, something that may or may not be of indirect interest to local governments and school districts. Home energy improvement tax credits end on December 31, 2025, the end of this year. This includes, for example, the $2,000 tax credit for installation of heat pumps, and it includes the 30% tax credit, 30% of costs, tax credit for installation of residential solar panels and battery storage. All of that is eliminated by the end of this year. By June 30th, 2026, the 30% tax credit for EV charging installation in low-income and non-urban areas will end. And these, of course, goes without saying, these are all federal tax credits, having nothing to do with the state of California or local jurisdictions. These are federal tax credits. Other things that the One Big Beautiful Act does is it rescinds unobligated green energy grant funding provided by the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, which of course was enacted into law under the in the Biden term. Now, the affected grant programs that are affected by this include the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is all but eliminated, environmental justice block grants, climate pollution reduction grants, DOE's energy efficiency contractor training grants, DOT's neighborhood access and equity program. Now, fortunately, as it's been reported, most of the grant monies for these programs have reportedly already been obligated during the Biden term. And what remains unobligated pertains to the administrative funds, the monies that the feds need to administer these grant programs. But the problem, though, is that under the Trump administration, they can still cause havoc with these programs, because if nobody's there to answer the phone for the Trump administration when somebody calls in for management of these grant funds, then we've got a problem. And we do have a problem, and we'll have a problem. Another major elimination in the One Big Beautiful Act are the investment tax credits and production tax credits for major new solar and wind projects. ITC and PTC. The ITC is a tax credit that covers between 6 and 70% of the eligible project costs for large-scale wind and solar clean energy projects. The PTC, the production tax credit, it's a tax credit that pays out over 10 years based on the amount of the electricity produced by these wind and solar projects. But the ITC and PTC is going away. If new solar and wind projects cannot commence construction by the end of this year, where they would still qualify under the existing program, they can still qualify for a longer ramp to use the ITC and PTC, but only if they qualify, only if these new wind and solar projects qualify under forthcoming new regulations that are governing restrictions on doing business with, quote, foreign entities of concern, end quote, read China. By January 1, 2026, new regulations governing business dealings with foreign entities of concern, China, are supposed to take effect, but it's been reported that I think it's the Treasury Department that promulgates those regulations. It's going to take a good long while to actually promulgate those regulations into final effect, final force, creating continuing uncertainty, as if there wasn't already enough, for major wind and solar projects and the financing that they need to get started and to go to construction. But the ITC and PTC are eliminated completely by January 1, 2028, subject to projects that may still have a short window left on placing their project in service. The net result of all of these tax code and regulatory machinations for these wind and solar projects is expected to seriously compromise the financial viability for new major solar and wind energy projects. Now, the Trump administration's attack on these green energy projects is already having an effect. It's been recently reported that 9% of the green factory investment announced since 2021 has been shelved, and apparently most of it since Trump returned to office. This includes lithium battery factories, wind power component part manufacturing, and other green energy endeavors that have been abandoned. There are tax credits that do remain under the One Big Beautiful Act. Tax credits for new geothermal energy projects, large-scale battery storage projects, and nuclear power projects remain at full value through 2033 and then begin to phase out after that. That's a good thing for proposed and planned new geothermal energy projects, but it's still questionable for large-scale battery storage projects because so many of the battery storage project component parts are sourced from China. And once the foreign entities of concern regulations get promulgated sometime next year, it's expected that it's going to be very difficult to source key green energy kinds of component parts from China, putting major battery storage projects at risk. Geothermal projects, on the other hand, so it's been reported, are more easily sourced in the United States and countries that are not covered by the foreign entities of concern regulations. So it's a lot of dates, a lot of tax credits. In summary, let me just put it together this way. Gone later this year are the tax credits for the purchase of new and used EV vehicles, heat pumps, and installation of residential solar panels and batteries. Gone by January 1, 2028 are the investment tax credits and production tax credits that are key to the financial viability of, and historically have been key to the financial viability of proposed new major wind and solar energy projects. Remaining in full force and effect are the Inflation Reduction Act's tax credits for new geothermal projects, large-scale battery storage, and nuclear power projects, all of which, though, are subject to compliance with forthcoming regulations on doing business with foreign entities of concern, meaning all of those key clean energy component parts and minerals and whatnot that are sourced in China. So it's a lot of uncertainty, more uncertainty, but also some very real deadlines as to some key green energy tax credits are being eliminated. So
Great.
I'll throw that back to you, Ken.
Thanks, Jim. So to turn to the state level here, so towards in the legislative session, the Speaker of the Assembly drafted a bill which was bold. He bowled through the Assembly, made it a must vote for all Democrats to vote for it. And what it does is it provides that, and it's a housing bill is the way it's described, and it will have some benefits for more housing. It prevents any further changes to state or local building codes, with limited exceptions for home hardening and fire-related changes that the state fire marshal proposes from this year through 2031. And the bill is a little vague in some particulars, so it's a little unclear, but what it appears is though the current building code cycle, which is the 2025 cycle, will go through, all jurisdictions will be able to accept those mandated provisions, but there are reach code provisions in there which will need to be acted on. The next code cycle will be skipped, the 2028 code cycle, and the best guess is that the 2032 code cycle, which would be they'd start working on before 2032, may be implemented, but that's a little unclear. So we have somewhere around a 6-year freeze on building codes. Now, the big concern about that was, what does that do for all of our local jurisdictions' efforts to pass reach codes, ones that, for example, would require a change when you replace your AC or install a new AC? There's a lot of efforts to mandate under the state reach codes that you have to put in a heat pump in that scenario. There are any number of other reach codes that were part of the 2025 code cycle that were not mandatory but are discretionary. And so the question is, can local jurisdictions still move forward with those? The bill provides that you can enact a local jurisdiction can adopt these reach codes if they have in effect they may adopt them up until September 30th of this year. But if they adopt them, then they've got to get, there's also got to be approval of the State Building Commission, which there are efforts made to expedite approvals at the State Building Commission. But that's going to be kind of tricky. It's also very problematic for a lot of jurisdictions, which may require 2 separate readings of an ordinance in order to pass it, many of which these jurisdictions don't meet during the month of August. So it's going to be a real challenge for local jurisdictions that are not properly teed up to pass these ordinances. There is an exception for changes that are consistent with the general plan. And we are lucky in Marin that at both the county level and in a number of our local jurisdictions, we have general plan provisions and climate action plan provisions that will make it possible for these local jurisdictions to pass some of these reach code provisions. But the details are still a little shaky. To give you an idea of the effort that's underway to understand all these right at the moment, the Building Decarbonization Coalition, which hosted an AB 306 provision, which hosted a Derek, if you could maybe grab this spot here, and then we'll get
Great.
Anyway, the Building Decarbonization Coalition, which has been hosting a series of conference calls with a lot of folks to understand this. Yesterday afternoon, we learned that, for example, Silicon Valley Clean Energy has hired Shoot Mahali, very prominent law firm, to look into what's possible on this. And they are offering the services of Shoot Mahali to all 11 cities in their jurisdiction to help them work through their general plan approvals. But the consensus out of the legal opinion, which was paraphrased to us rather than read, was that local agencies should have wide latitude when interpreting their general plan policies. It's up for the local agency to determine applicability. Even policies not directly addressing energy, for example, health policies, air pollution, et cetera, are in bounds. Referring to a climate action plan is not necessary, but would obviously be consistent and help. So there are opportunities where there are documents like a general plan already in effect, and it had to be in effect by June 10th to then now enact REACH codes. So yeah, I'll stop screen sharing. Thank you. The reason that letter was up was MCL signed on to a letter which about 50 other environmental organizations around the state signed, trying to get this thing stopped in the Senate, but the governor wanted it passed. So anyway, I just say that another excellent resource to look to is a council agenda report by the City of San Luis Obispo. Chris Reed was nice enough to share that with us, and he gave a shout out to you, Derek. So anyway, there's a lot of action on this, but everybody's got to get on their local jurisdictions quickly to make sure, particularly if they have not enacted the 2025 building code today. So that's just a quick update on that.
Derek Johnson, our featured speaker, has joined us, and probably what we should do is, for starters, just quickly go around the room. People can indicate their name and their organizational affiliation, and then Ken will introduce the speaker, and we'll move on.
We can't hear you.
Is it because we're muted, or could you just not hear Robert?
It's because he's not close enough to his mic.
Okay, so
Okay.
they didn't hear that.
That's
last
good.
bit.
Yes.
So what we're going to do is go around, quickly go around the room and then get to our, to indicate who's here and organizational affiliation very briefly, and that's it. And then get to our featured speaker. So, that's it.
No, it's a name and organizational affiliation.
And very loud for the owl.
Not loud.
Hello, my name is Ariel C. I am a PhD fellow. I'm working with Festival Marine School, helping Nevada Unified School District to be more sustainable.
Good morning, Mary Sackett, Marin County Supervisor.
Good morning, Julia Reinhardt. Good morning,
Very quickly, and people should yell so that the folks on the phone can hear.
MCL Associates Climate Lobby.
I'm Bill Cole, Director of MCL, and also Chair of Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership, which deals with
are Erica Derwood, Program Manager with Sustainable Marin Schools. I'll be working with this. Sarah Thatcher with County of Marin Sustainability Team.
Mark Chabria, also with the County of Marin Sustainability Team.
I'm Rebecca Schwartz-Lesberg, the very, very new Executive Director of Marine Conservation.
And Derek Johnson, I'm your speaker today. I'm County Executive.
Jody Timms, Fairfax Climate Action Committee of 350 Marin.
Megan Henderson, 350 Marin intern and student at Cal Poly Slow.
I'm Bill Carney with Marin Can and also Sustainable San Rafael.
Tamara Peters, Resilient Neighborhoods.
Bruce Ackerman, Fairfax Climate Action Committee and no longer on the Fairfax Council.
Alina Osborne, Cool the Earth, Right and Red Clean, and Sustainable San Rafael.
Bernie Samet, Marin Conservation League, and I'm active in the Civil Grand Jury Marin chapter.
Alex Statner, Healthy Building Science.
Ray Welch.
Talia Smith, Interim Deputy County Executive, and also I do our legislative programs, so we're the county position letter to 3 to 6.
And we're aware that there are some difficulties in seeing the room via the owl. So Ray Paris, our civic office manager, is trying to come up with a workaround.
It looks like the owl's up now.
Okay, good. All right, great. Ken?
Thanks.
All right, I'm trying to multitask here because I'm doing a little technical support at the same time, but let me introduce Derek. So Derek is the new county executive for Marin County, a Novato native. He went down to Santa Barbara, where he very correctly decided to become a gaucho and become an environmental studies major. I'm an environmental studies major, so I just wanted down there, so I want to shout out to that. And then another significant achievement, he managed to get a job in Santa Barbara after graduating, which was hugely difficult, where he was general manager of Parks and Recs in Goleta, California, and the director of long range planning in Santa Barbara County. For the past 12 years, he was with the city of San Luis Obispo, serving as city manager, assistant city manager, and director of community development. He's the top executive in Marin County, and we're very excited to hear what he can tell us, particularly about what's happening with the new sustainability team that's been put together there. But mostly get to know you, Derek, and find out what you can share with us about what's going on in Marin County.
Great. Well, thank you so much first off for having me join you here today. I'm really excited to be here. One of the things that brought me back to Marin County after my 37 years away from Marin County was really just, that there was a strong alignment between the things that are important to me to work on and the values that we have as a county and the priorities that the board president and the board have established for our organization. And fortunately, that I have a lot of background and experience in those areas. Excuse me. And those areas are in housing and sustainability and climate and infrastructure and disaster preparedness and response, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, homelessness. All these issues are near and dear, to my heart. And ultimately, there is a strong alignment. And from my experience, when you have strong alignment between an executive and the board, and then you pair that up with policy and partnership, you can really move the needle in big ways, and I think that was demonstrated in my recent experience and time in San Luis Obispo, where I felt comfortable moving away from that organization and stepping into a leadership role here at Marin County, because I felt like I could have impact. But most importantly there, and it was mentioned, my colleague Chris Reed, I had confidence that they were going to continue to do the work to really bring about sustainability for San Luis Obispo. And that was evidenced in our really steep decline in greenhouse gas emissions, our rapid uptake by the community and leadership by the municipal organization in adopting sustainable practices, and really starting to kind of turn the tide. I wasn't, under the false belief that, San Luis Obispo or even Marin, for that matter, could change the global phenomenon of climate change. But I do think we can be a policy thought leader and a practice leader in all these areas. And I think we can be kind of a beacon for the rest of California, the rest of the United States, and the world. I'm reminded, when I grew up, the organic movement started here in Marin County, and so what is that next organic movement, from Marin County that we can create together as, a team, because I really see the work that we have in front of us as a team, and that the Marin County, the municipal organization, the subdivision of the state of California, we can't do it alone. In fact, we have to have good, solid partnerships and try to get alignment. Which really brings me to, I think, the other area that brought me here is when I was speaking to the recruiter who was talking to me about this leadership opportunity, was really that the board was making a fundamental shift from the historic structure. And that structure had largely been in place. I went back and looked at the ordinance, or the section of the ordinance for the county, to create the county executive. And really, they hadn't changed the job since 1955. So it had really, I think it was a long time coming. And I think it's, kudos to, the board, President Sackett, and others for taking the time to really stop and think about, hey, what do we need in the future? What's the most effective way that we can move forward? And what, was quickly realized, I think, by the board, and, at least one of the maxims that I subscribe to is that, we need to have kind of, executive, administrative capacity and authority to carry out these complex policy and operational issues. Those priorities that I mentioned, housing and homelessness and climate and infrastructure and disaster readiness, they don't fit neatly into one department in the county. Fire isn't just responsible for, and the sheriff isn't responsible for disaster preparedness. Now that is a cross section that really became evident in our most recent big, emergency, which was COVID, where it required every hand to lean in. I think there was a lot of lessons about that. And I think that really applies to kind of why I'm here today around climate. We know that climate is going to require, everyone to lean into this work, from public works, from the community development agency, to even our sheriff's department, the type of vehicles that are driving. I was riding my bike late last night around West Marin, and I see two big hulking SUVs come by me with the sheriff logo. I thought to myself, aren't those electrified? What could we do? Why are we still using those same type of petrol vehicles? There's alternatives out there today. Have we ever had these kind of conversations with the sheriff? What does the sheriff need to feel comfortable to have electric vehicles? And I know that's one of our topics today. All the way to the fire department. What are the alternatives? Because I'm a firm believer that, municipalities need to lead by example. We can't ask our community to do something that we're not already doing ourselves. They will look at us and say, wait a minute, you want me to put in a heat pump, but, the Civic Center boiler you just replaced is, continues to be gas fired, or, how are you cooling the Civic Center? Or what about this new fire facility you're building out in San Geronimo Valley? What have you done to make that green? And so if we're not doing that and leading by example, how can we ask, a low-income family to retrofit their property, or a apartment building, or a business owner to move away from a gas-fired, kitchen in a commercial facility? And so, fortunately, I have a lot of experience in this area. I was the chair of Central Coast Community Energy, which is the largest CCA in terms of by geography, and also in terms of number of customers served in California. So it stretched all the way from Santa Cruz all the way to Santa Barbara County. I was the chair of the operations board. It's a much different governance structure that they have versus MCE, where the county administrators and city managers play kind of a strategy role. So my job was to buy, implement, and then help transact on power purchase agreements, so that we were trying to really rid our power supply of greenhouse gas emissions. And so we did that very, very rapidly, buying into some of the largest non-GHG energy producing sources in the world. The big wind farm that's out in New Mexico that's currently under construction. We bought into pressurized air that we were going to pump into the ground out in old depleted aquifers to provide essentially a battery. We were innovating in very different, exciting ways. And a lot of that happened, not only through 3CE, but a lot of that happened with a group like this. And I've shared with some partners that are sitting here around the table today some ways that we, my most recent post with the Slow Climate Coalition, where they were really a thought partner, and I think in a lot of different ways, co-partners in a lot of these strategies. They were the folks who showed up, who did a lot of the social validation as community leaders, that what we were working on was something that was good for the community. It wasn't just a government imposed solution and idea. So again, I'm really excited to be here today. I know that there were some specific questions, and so I prepared a slide deck that I hope won't bore you all to death, but I wanted to be responsive to all of your questions, and then I want to leave some opportunity for questions and dialogue at the end of the presentation. I'm really excited that there's some young people here, because I was channeling, I'm back in the land of Star Wars. And so, I was talking to our intern as we were walking down the steps today. I was like, channeling Princess Leia, you're our only hope. You are really our only hope. And so a lot of this work that we're doing, we have to, and I think we have to help the community get away from their most immediate now biases. We have got to move to a place where we start thinking about the next generation, but also act with some urgency, because climate change isn't waiting. It's not waiting for anyone. It's continuing to march along. I don't know how many of you read The Economist every week. I do, but Cal, who's a famous satire cartoonist, he put it, I think, probably the best I've seen it. It was The Big Beautiful Bill. It was his rendition of the Big Beautiful Bill, and it was climate change, and there was a big monster. It was on fire. It's coming through the crowd of the world, kicking people aside. And then, and then it sits down for a minute as it's kind of conquered this area of land and opens its mouth. And there's this machine that's kind of formed like a donkey that's feeding, it's titled The Big Beautiful Bill, and it's feeding climate change. And so, I want to acknowledge that that's, the backdrop that we're in right now, is that, a lot of the work and momentum that we had, for a lot of years, where we had alignment between the federal and state budget, is, really, a lot of that has, gone away. We saw the Big Beautiful Bill. It took a lot of, incentives out of what it was trying to inject in the economy. And so that means, what are we going to do and how are we going to lead at the local level? And also channeling a little bit of the book Abundance. I don't know how many here read that book, but I think, how do we get stuff done? Because I really want to put action in climate action planning. So which then gets me to, one of the, parts of the questions that you had was around really the reorganization in my office. And I kind of say that in the backdrop of the board's establishment of executive structure. I took the first, year to really spend some time getting to understand the systems, the structures, and the people. I grew up in Marin. I know the topography and geography. I don't know, all the systems and structures, informal and formal. And so I wanted to spend some time, and I brought some people into the organization who could help me really develop a structure in my office that could then help support the outcomes that are of the board, which I think are a reflection of the outcomes that the electorate and the community wants. And so today I'm just talking about one of those pieces, which is the organizational structure of the new climate team. And so the question you asked is, you're expanding the sustainability department from 5 to 9 staff members. What are your priorities and objectives for this department? What are the key tasks you want them to focus on? And in particular, what positions are you adding? So it's a really good question. I think, what I quickly realized is that, and this is from my previous role, and I did something similar. I created an office of sustainability and natural resources in the city manager's office, largely because I knew, and before it was in the community development agency, which it is today. And that's just, not to throw shade on all of our talented people who are here today. They're doing an excellent job in the role that they've been assigned to. And I quickly realized that climate needs to, one, have a director. It can't be a side job to one director. It needs to be something that someone walks in every single day and has strategy and tactics in front of them about what are they going to do to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and what are we doing to prepare for resiliency into the future. And so that's got to be someone's job every single day and day in and day out. And so Talia, who is currently serving as an interim for deputy county executive, will be creating, excuse me, I don't know, do we have any water for it? Perhaps water. Water would probably be best for everyone. That essentially we're going to be in the process of developing the job description, and I'm hoping to have representatives of this group help us select Marin County's first climate director. It's going to be a pivotal role, going to be a thought leader, someone who's going to be a partner with all of you here around the table. And as I mentioned, day in and day out, could be doing that work. There, as I mentioned, they're under the deputy county executive, just for awareness. Thank you.
Sure. They're also donut holes for health food.
Thank you. I'll wait until after the meeting for that. Thank you. Is that essentially they're a part of the deputy county executive structure. In that grouping also as well is economic development, so that we understand that making sure our economic development is aligned with our climate practices. And we also have municipal services. So, my background as a city manager, I quickly realized that and this is something that was an outgrowth of conversations with the board, and particularly in districts 3 and district 4, where we had, urbanized villages for the most part, or cities like Marin City, and we didn't have anyone who was coordinating the work in those communities. And so now we're going to have essentially a municipal services group that is essentially going to be responsible for being the county manager, so to speak, for West Marin, but also for Marin City, and then helping out in some areas as well. So, what are the key objectives, for this group? Well, I'll kind of play through the rest of the roles. So we have a new senior planner position, so that will be added. And fortunately, and I should say this, is the board, they funded all these positions about 4 years ago. And so we were sitting on nearly about $4 million of one-time funding in addition. So I didn't have to ask for new money for these positions. The board had the foresight to set aside the budget. And then when I came in and said, hey, this is great, we've got this budget, how can we best optimize the staffing resources within the budget that we have? And so we have a senior planner to really work on 2 pieces, the Bayline Shore adaptation plan, but also to work on some other resiliency projects as well. We're going to take some pilot projects probably down in the Bothing Marsh area to see how we can partner with both Mill Valley and the city of Sausalito, because they are probably at the best readiness state to move forward with some climate adaptation projects. We have another senior planner who can help out with both delivery of projects, but also at the same time on the ocean side, on the seaside, we have an adaptation plan that we need to work on together. And then we've got support for some analysts looking at what are the best practices, what are the grant opportunities, what is the funding that is available. Marin County, we've missed out on a lot of funding at the climate level because we haven't had the capacity to create the partnerships and get the project shovel ready to move forward. And then we've got essentially some other folks that you already know. So that planning manager is Dana and her talented team, who some of them are here today, who are going to be working on a whole host of mitigation issues. Their work portfolio may change over time as we fully flesh out our strategy. This is just the most immediate climate team. There are climate assets that are also sprinkled throughout the rest of the county. So there are climate resources that are dedicated to working on this in Health and Human Services, in parks, and if there's any other locations, but we'll be making sure that those resources are coordinated as well, and that they're all under some sort of umbrella structure. So really, the purpose around this reorganization is there's 5 key pieces. One is to implement the climate action plan with greater speed and coordination. 2, establish a centralized sustainability backbone. 3, support, and hopefully this resonates with you, community-driven climate equity work. 4 is to secure and manage external funding. And then 5, track progress and increase transparency. So we're doing a better job of communicating what's our progress, and that was key in my work in San Luis Obispo, and something that I'm hoping to develop here. We came up, and this is not my idea, I stole this from Sevilla, Spain. They had a sustainable Sevilla program. We called it Sustainable Slow, where we started to brand everything that we did, whether it was recycling, green waste, our electrification systems, our charging stations. It was all under this Sustainable Slow umbrella, so that people could really start to recognize that these weren't one-off, half-baked strategies, but they all were aligned around various different goals that we were reporting on and measuring, and that the community understood. And so that's something that we really want to make sure that we're doing, on a big scale. So I'm going to stop there because, I think this is a big part of some of the questions. And then I've got some more kind of cocoon areas that I jump into, because there were some questions about program of what's going to happen. But maybe before I do that, we can stop and talk a little bit or can field some questions about the structure.
This is a lot better explanation than we've heard before, and this is wonderful. It's great to understand this. So from my perspective, so all the mitigation stuff is going to sort of stay under Dana and flow down from that with the existing team.
Correct.
Okay. And you talked about, when you were talking about the adaptation piece, you did a good job of explaining sea level rise. Are there some wildfire aspects to that adaptation plan?
Absolutely. So, eventually just like there's this consortium here, you mentioned Chris Reed in San Luis Obispo, we had a climate team, and it was a cross section of folks from fire, from public works, from various different departments. We will have someone on the Wildfire Protection Authority that essentially is there. So we're aligning our vegetation management with threats, adaptation, policies, etc.
One other question I have, and this may be something you're going to discuss later, but what we're real interested in hearing about is there's some things like sea level rise which don't respect jurisdictional boundaries.
Yep.
And which the cities and towns also have a big part to play in. And how do you see this county organization interacting with these localities?
Great. We'll put that question in the bike rack, and I'll have a slide on that. So I'll
Okay.
get to that one in just a
Great,
minute.
great.
But just anything on the structure, is there any questions? Because the structure, all this kind of cascades from this, idea around the structure that I've laid out. Please.
I just have a clarifying question. As somebody who's very new to all this, of these positions, which are existing and which are new yet to be filled?
Yeah, so great question. So the deputy county executive position is it's a new role, new position currently vacant. Talia is sitting in that role. Right now we'll be launching a recruitment. The climate director is a new position. We'll be launching a recruitment. The 2 senior planners are new positions. We'll be launching recruitments. And this administrative analyst position is vacant. We'll be launching recruitment as well.
Thank you for that.
And then everything else is all existing. And so this is the starting point, as I mentioned, and how we ultimately address the other resources that are in parks and HHS and fire. My gut, what tells me today is that will be kind of a matrix structure. So there'll be dashed lines, to those resources. So we just have better coordination. It won't necessarily report through to the climate director.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Derek, if I could just jump in, you said, what are the other departments that are doing some of this work? I think DPW with active transportation planner has part of the climate. Fire certainly has a lot of disaster mitigation. Public health has been a piece of this. Libraries also for cruising centers and also education and lending libraries. So there are other pieces, but how do we make them all work together and have awareness? I think if there's opportunities, whether it's branding all together or just working so that every hand knows what the other hand is doing. There are pieces throughout the organization.
Yeah.
Derek, what's the budget for the climate team at this point look like?
So good question. So we have the $4 million in one-time dollar. When we're probably going to then figure out what are some pilot projects we can work on, and we'll probably circle back with you. Roughly the salaries for this are probably northward of all of this group. Probably close to $2.5–3 million.
Okay. And then maybe one more structure question, and I think some of the other questions that are coming in may be answered later, but is disaster response, is that part of this, or is that somewhere else?
I was really excited because I came from, as you heard earlier, from both Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo, and Santa Barbara unfortunately has the highest activation of their emergency operations center in the United States because of fires. So I served on multiple emergency operation and responses. And so I think it was the last budget cycle, the board thankfully added 10 people and established an Office of Emergency Management under the fire department. So we have our first director of emergency management, Stephen Torrance, who is exceptionally talented. And so there will be a component of this, and I'll give you an example. So I was speaking with Supervisor Mo Peters yesterday, and one of our biggest evacuation risks is Tam Valley, Mill Valley, in those areas. Well, imagine in the future if we have a high tide or a sea level rise event where the major roads are both flooded because of sea level rise, and then we have that coupled with a fire. What are we going to do? And so, that's just one example where we need to have Office of Emergency Management working in tandem with our adaptation and resiliency team.
We have a couple of hands up from sustainability climate program coordinators, Gretchen Schubeck from Nevada. Gretchen, you have a quick question?
I do. Welcome, Derek. Thrilled to have you on board. Wondering where the Zero Waste Marin JPA fits into this structure, if you've thought about that yet.
Yes, we've thought a lot about that, in terms of how can it be our partner, with reducing, one of our biggest greenhouse gas emission sources, methane. So, I have some direct experience here. We were the first in San Luis Obispo, United States, to develop a large scale digester so that it could essentially digest nearly 60,000 metric tons a year of green waste instead of hauling it away to various different counties throughout the region. Is daily cover as we do here today. We essentially created through a conglomerate between a Japanese and Swiss company for a gigantic, basically cow's stomach, a mechanical cow's stomach to digest all of the green waste. And in turn, what it do today, it produced energy into the grid, and then it powered all of our trash trucks. And so that is just one example, what we can do, the smaller abnegation strategies around, reusable foodware, those are all things that I have ideas on in terms of what we can do to make sure we're, again, aligning zero waste with whatever we decide our sustainable Marin, one Marin, whatever we decide we're going to call it, so people can see that, hey, there's some actual coordination that's happening with zero waste.
So we have another question from Kitty Lau Garcia, who's Fluency and Sustainability Manager from Sausalito. Katie?
Thank you so much. Hi, Derek. Hi, everybody. Congratulations, Rebecca. My question, very easy. Given that these positions were created almost 4 years ago by the county and then not filled, I'm wondering what your hiring timeline is.
Great question. So I'm hoping to be hiring in this fall timeframe and that have a fully intact team up and running to begin this climate work in earnest in early 2026.
All right, why don't we move on to?
Yeah, we'll move on. So moving on, there was some, down to the next slide, there was some specific questions, and I'll just read the question for everyone. With federal and state funding reductions, and I talked a little bit about that, how will the county sustainability team support electrification? So, there's other experts around the table, and so feel free to jump in and help me out along the way. So originally we had a rebate budget was allocated to bridge federal incentives. So our current budget is expected to be fully allocated by October, November of 2025. And so we are considering what are the next steps. We're beginning to research into potential for time of sale energy audit ordinance in 2026. But the final efforts on that are kind of to be determined. Just some information around this, the electrified Marin rebates progress to date. We've distributed about $1.3 million in rebates to residents. 27% of the rebates have gone to income qualified residents, which are those that are 80% below AMI. And thus far, nearly 1,400 gas appliances have been replaced. And so we've averaged spending around $55,000 on a quarterly basis. There's a lot more work to do. I mentioned before that in my role as the operations chair for 3CE, we really used that as a way for doing a lot of the climate work on behalf of the nearly 35 members of that agency. So there was a very robust rebate and incentive program through 3CE. I can't sit here today and say exactly what MCE is offering and whether or not that can be enhanced and potentially backfill some of the federal and state programs. But I know we have people who serve on the board, and I'm hoping to have an opportunity to have some influence on some of those policies, because given the about face on climate with the federal administration, we're going to have to figure out what we can do locally. And there's some ideas to do that make sure also at the same time that MCE remains rate competitive with, PG&E.
You had one more thing on here that I would just comment on. You said focusing on supporting transition to meet the Air District's 27, and 2029 appliance rules. So I think the South Coast Air District backed off on their rules, and we've been hearing some rumors that there's going to be an effort at the Bay Area Air District to delay these. So we've been trying to talk with Brian Colbert, he's the county rep on Bachman, to hold firm on those things, because we need those sort of provisions in place.
Yeah, because you all know these rules really are the enabling threshold that help us do a lot of the implementation. Without that, it really becomes more difficult. You're talking to one of the best law firms, in the state around these issues. And so there's a legal nexus we have to have in place in order to kind of get to the tactical decisions. Yeah. So,
and things like the electrification roadmap were built on the assumption that these Bachman rules are remain in place.
absolutely.
The timeline remains. All right.
Which is a good segue into the status of the energy reach codes. So the question that was brought forward was, will the county seek to enact prior to October 1st any remaining Cal Green requirements not already approved? And so we just start off with just, kind of doing some level setting of where we at today. Fortunately, we already have a very strong reach code, and the legislation that was brought forward will not impact that. As you all know, Assembly Bill 130 includes language that originated in AB 306. And so it does freeze our state building code with a 2025 cycle through 2031. And so I won't go into great details about, those provisions. Probably all of you have been briefed,
We talked about it right before you walked in.
So I don't want to, go over that information again, but as part of our general 2025 code update, so we have to adopt a new code. We are going to be moving forward with some changes in advance, and we're proposing to change the residential remodels and additions flex pathway exemption from 750 square feet to 500 square feet and new ADUs. And the reason for that is we want to have better alignment, across jurisdictions. That probably doesn't frustrate our community more than anything is to have 11 different policies and then another policy for the county. As much as we can, we try to have policy parity across all jurisdictions. We're largely able to do that if you've been following the e-bike ordinance, and that's through Talia's and President Sackett's leadership. So that's one example. We're trying to do that in the unincorporated as well. And we don't see that there's a new need for construction reach code at the 2025 baseline code, because we already strongly favor in our reach code electrical appliances. And as you all know, we had that unfortunate ruling with the Berkeley decision that federal rules preclude and preempt any jurisdictions from mandating a single fuel. And so we feel like our existing code, incentivizes people making rational economic and other decisions to go through the electrification route. So just an update on the status of all jurisdictions is that the county, Fairfax, San Rafael, Tiburon, Corte Madera, and San Anselmo all have existing flex path codes. Larkspur, as I understand it, is pursuing additional flex path before the deadline. And then also Mill Valley is considering one as well. And we didn't have any, as the time of me preparing today's presentation, I didn't have any insight on Novato, Sausalito, Belvedere, and Ross. Here again, we hope we can lead by example. And if they want to take pieces of our code, if you want to speak to this at all, or if you can't, that's fine. But if you have any other information about those jurisdictions.
No, sure. I mean, we've certainly been in contact through our work with the Marin Climate and Energy Partnership with Mill Valley and Larkspur, who are planning to pursue kind of catching up by adopting the flex path ordinance. And yeah, so very, very much in touch with all of the climate stuff.
So I'm going to move on to, in terms of some of the questions around implementation challenges. And as you all know, that this is not to be underestimated. We know that right now, today, we have the technology, we have the policies, we have the ability to do all this work. It's just that really, from my perspective, it's a question of collective will and collective coordination to make this all work. You've seen examples around the world where this is happening. I mean, the Scandinavia, for example, what Norway has done. Norway is leading the way. They have a sovereign wealth fund that's built on oil. They've still been able to make considerable gains. And it's largely a result of having, I think, alignment. So really, the question that was asked is, what are the non-monetary challenges to implementing the electrification roadmap and the EV readiness plan. So I'll kind of chunk this into, you know, some different areas. One is we have, well, funding has always been a factor, and some of the biggest challenge we face in implementing the electrification roadmap and EV readiness plan are, one, workforce capacity and training. As you all know, we have some real challenges with the number of skilled laborers out there that could do a lot of this work. You know, and this is where I've had some conversation with Jonathan Eldridge about what can we be doing at the comm level to be creating six-figure jobs for folks who don't have a career pathway into higher education, but want to contribute and help out with the climate crisis. You know, the board is actually going to be considering, you know, policies around community workforce agreements. And one of the hopes that as we have this conversation is, you know, what can we do through those community workforce agreements to make sure that we have our trade groups creating apprenticeships and other opportunities so we're upskilling labor so that they're prepared for electrification work that we have here. We have, you know, some challenges, and this is, you know, I saw a few hands come up around any of you reading the book Abundance. You know, permitting and code complexity is that now it's just difficult. It's just difficult. And the normal mom and pop and business owner, you know, they've got a million things they're trying to work on as a business, and then they come into this world, and we all live this world, but it's a foreign language to them. And so, you know, what can we do to reduce the friction, like the friction, so that we can ultimately get people into compliance? And then how can we use incentives? And so, you know, you may have read about in some of the work that I'm doing in my 14 months. We've hired an outside group called KPMG. They're doing an assessment of the Community Development Agency, our Department of Public Works, and the Marin Housing Authority, looking at how can we improve our customer service and our outcomes. In particular, one area I'm really looking at is how do we get to compliance within the policies, but how do we do it with less friction and ultimately people coming out of the process with a good experience that they want to then champion with their other friends and colleagues, right? Imagine that, like, hey, it was great that I did the solar permitting, you should do it too. That's what we want to have out of the process. And so how do we help people get to the right yes as quick as possible? We also know that, you know, really this comes down to behavior change and behavior modifications at the end of the day. And so that's going to really require us to rethink some of our strategies. So I know some of you spent some time with the climate work that my team worked on down in San Luis Obispo. We won, was recognized as the best climate action plan in the United States by the American Planning Association. It led with, it was called Stories of the Future. And it was stories from families and people and organizations about them living in a sustainable, climate resilient world. It wasn't a bunch of charts and data and strategies that just, you know, were sleepers. It was about people, because most people, if you look at the polls, they have these latent concerns and fears. They just don't understand how to get from there to where we need to go and what that looks like. And so some of this is going to require a whole mindset shift amongst all of us of how do we talk about this and how do we bring people along. You know, there's some other pieces, grid reliability and utility coordination. Thanks to President Sackett, we've already done some of that work. She's convened some meetings with PG&E and to make sure we have a grid that is responsive to the electrification needs, and that we're trying to identify where are those gaps and do some advanced planning so that as we start to add charging and electrification, that we don't have the grid being a barrier to this electrification work. And then, you know, at the end of the day, we need to remind ourselves that equity and access need to be at the core. We can't leave behind lower income families and marginalized communities. And so I know that is an ethos that's built into the team already, but how do we make sure that that's baked into our strategies? So I'm going to move on a little bit. And some of this you may have seen in the headlines was last week. I think we brought forward our response to the grand jury. Seems like eons ago at this point. But as you asked a question about a recent grand jury task force pointed out that the county is not on track to meet its 2030 and 2045 climate goals. And the question was, how will the county and its sustainability team address the shortfall? So I always appreciate the grand jury. They're a really talented group of volunteers who do a lot of work. And I just want to point out that some of the work that they did, I think leaves out in some important data points. So the chart that is on your left-hand side really shows and compares 1990 to 2022 and 2030 target. But the chart that the grand jury used left out the important 2005 emissions. So it's important to remember when the climate action plan was first developed, we didn't have really reliable data to look back to 1990. It wasn't available. So the state allowed cities and counties to estimate 1990 levels at 15% below 2005 levels. I'm talking to a group of experts, so you probably all know this. So by skipping to 2005 data in the chart that the grand jury prepared, it gives the impression that Marin has made less progress than we actually have. That's not to say we don't have a long way to go. We've picked all the low-hanging fruit, and that's why I talk about behavior modifications and electrification is really the way that we're going to have to move forward. And frankly, folks, and that's going to tie to land use. We're going to have to look at probably land use in our future as well as we think about sustainable transportation. So that said, we can't let up. We still have to make major reductions in fossil fuel use, and that's really in our transportation sector and our existing built environment. We don't build a lot of homes in Marin County. And as a result of that, we really need to ramp up our incentives and our retrofits of existing homes and also our commercial buildings to meet our 2030 and 2045 goals. So I've already had some conversations with Dana of how can we make sure that there's more transparency and visibility to this. So you'll probably, into the future, there's this, who's a planning wonk in this room, kind of a planning geek. Any planning geeks? No, no one's ready to. I know you're out there. I know you're just too shy to say it, but we prepared this thing called the General Plan Annual Report, and so every year, and I've been working with Sarah Jones, our Community Development Agency Director, to probably bump that up and make sure we have a whole climate section. So on at least an annual basis, we're doing a real deep dive and also some communication on the progress that we're making towards these climate goals. So moving forward, and how am I doing on time?
You're fine.
There's one question from Warren Wells from the Marin County Bicycle Coalition.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Warren.
Hi, Derek. Thanks so much for the presentation. Really appreciate it. Just kind of wanted to add one note on that electrification front. Obviously, a lot of the county and the country's goals on EV electrification are going to be hampered by the changing policy coming from DC. And I just, I think, looking at the climate action plans from around the county, obviously, as you point out, we see, majority of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the transportation sector. So, I really want to encourage everyone to look at, a great way of reducing that, which is, getting people out of cars, either walking, biking, or riding transit. That an e-bike is a very cheap electric vehicle. Maybe it doesn't have the subsidies that an EV does, but it doesn't need it if you can buy one for $1,500 or $2,000. That all said, this year has been a really challenging one here at the Bike Coalition. Despite, I think, good policies regarding climate change and complete streets, we've seen a number of cities, Sausalito, Novato, Tiburon, Belvedere, pushing back against, essentially cost-free street reconfigurations when there are trade-offs to be made. So I guess the question is, what policy can we see at the county level, to encourage, push, cajole the cities that control their streets and roads kind of when the rubber meets the road for these kind of individual street reconfigurations. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks, Warren, for the question. And so Warren knows this, but what was it in my background is, I ride my bike about 7,000 miles a year. So, I'm still both recreationally and, on a cycling team. I love riding bikes. And part of the work that we did in SLO was really about reimagining suburbia. We had to, the policymakers finally got to the point, they said, hey, if you go back and look at the right-of-ways that we have, that's the public domain. It's and it's there for the public. I think there needs to be a policy discussion around how do we best allocate that right-of-way given all of the needs out there. And in some cases, not every road's going to be designed for bikes and peds. And we do know that if we're going to see the mode shift, we're going to have to make interventions beyond just paint. And I think to answer your question, Warren, is we have to tie some of these alternative mode shifts and transportation shifts to bigger goals, and also talk about what are the trade-offs. I lived through a lot of the bike wars down in my most recent appointment. Where we had nearly, folks who were threatened with recall and all these other things. And you fast forward today, I just recently went back to San Luis Obispo for a visit, and everyone has forgotten about it. They are now living in harmony. They can't imagine their life without these facilities. The parade of terribles that they thought was going to fall on the community as a result of these investments didn't happen. And where there were challenges, guess what? The team went in and fixed them. They said, oh, that didn't quite work the way we thought. And, so again, this is a little bit of mindset shift where we have to then figure out what's for the greatest good. How do we promote something for one Marin? But these are tough change conversations, really tough change conversations that at the end of the day, it's going to come down to that. So I'm going to move over to climate adaptation. And so the question that was asked is this is the question we put in the parking lot earlier, excuse me, in the bike rack, sorry, is sea level rise does not respect jurisdictional boundaries. How can the county focus on coordinating a county-wide response? So here again, and I know I'm showering a lot of thanks to the board, but they had the foresight for understanding that, this is going to require probably an unprecedented level of collaboration, coordinated, and shared investment by all of the jurisdictions. So Marin has a grandmother's quilt of government, it was like a little piece everywhere. We've got 11 cities, 60 special districts, dozens of joint powers agencies. And so getting things done is unlike I've seen it anywhere else, because it's, everyone has a voice, which is good. And at the same time, it makes collaboration and coordination especially important. So what are we doing? So the board, as I started to allude to, invested in some funding through essentially undertake a governance exercise with our cities to look at what is the best governance structure. And so, in this instance, we're not at the forefront. Both San Mateo County and San Francisco County and some of the other neighboring 9 counties that are in front of us. So we're looking at the question of, well, do we modify and change our flood control district to have to do sea level rise? Do we form another joint powers agency? Do we form a special district? What is the governance structures that bring about the best way that people feel it's equitable and also timely and fair to everyone in terms of all of the decisions and investments we're going to have to make into the future. And this is gonna be a pretty challenging task. I met recently with the San Francisco Estuary Institute. And they shared with me some alarming numbers about this adaptation challenge in front of us. They mentioned and they said these were dated numbers, but this is the data that they had, is that we had about $120 billion worth of interventions that need to be made in all 9 Bay Area counties. Marin County is roughly about 20% of that. And they said on the best days, $10 to $15 billion before the change in administration, I will add and emphasize, might be available from state and federal sources. So really, it's, from my perspective, whatever governance structure that we take on, they are going to have a lot of latitude and authority to be able to do big things, because we are going to see challenges like we haven't seen before. We're starting to see glimmers of those, right? I grew up here. I can remember, 101 getting flooded on the King Tide. That's just going to happen with greater frequency, and it's not too far. And TAM just recently, and President Sackett shared with me a study that they did on sea level rise, and particularly its impact to transportation facilities. And it's going to happen quicker and with greater impact than people think it. And so we're going to need to have that level of coordination and collaboration, not only with our cities, but with TAM and Caltrans. We're just trying to figure out what is that umbrella organization to make this happen. Also, at the same time, we need to figure out, well, what is the role of this umbrella organization? Are they going to be doing project delivery or just technical support? I think that's a question that's out there. And so are they going to be doing county-wide planning as well? So as I mentioned earlier, we have a potential pilot project that we're going to be working on with the cities of Sausalito and Mill Valley. There's nothing like a good object lesson, to really help us understand the details of how we need to adjust. And so we'll probably be moving in tandem with this pilot project, and at the same time, continue to work on the governance structure as well. Yes, please.
I'm a little unclear whether the governance structure you're talking about is an independent entity from the identity brand thing you were talking about like 20 minutes ago. Are those two different things?
Yeah, so the branding is really, it could be under, one Marin, I don't know whatever it gets called, but the governance structure is really, what is the governance and decision making, and then policy and project implementation structure that we want to have for Marin. And so we're looking at a whole spectrum of options, and happy to share the slide deck with your team or come back and share those, because that's probably, I could spend an hour and a half, 2 hours just talking about the governance structure. And so I see it being part of a whole system, but one piece particularly about how decisions and projects are implemented for adaptation.
Would that be a new government agency?
We don't know. I think we're looking at the whole spectrum. Is it a special district? Is it existing existing entity that gets modified in their scope and purview? Is it a memorandum of agreement where people just get together and they all really are back at their own entity? So we've got this whole spectrum that looks at the different governance structures with their pros and cons, and then their costs. And so we're still socializing that, because there's a lot, as we have these discussions broadly about these models, we're delving into specific questions that, we don't have answers to, because literally, this is kind of cutting edge organizational theory about how to develop an organization that can deliver, climate adaptation projects in the future. All right. Yes, please.
Yeah, this all sounds fantastic.
Can you speak up?
This sounds great as far as both the structure and the messaging and branding that you speak of. I wanted to ask whether you see the flood zone, the flood control district, that was involved with flood zone 9 in Ross Valley. And as I'm sure you know, that's been very, very frustrating. And I don't know what can be done in the final phase of that as we spend the rest of the money, or whether there might be any more, but it was just a classic mismatch of messaging to the public, and a small number of people have been able to derail everything that flood zone tried to do, or all the major things that they tried to do, to the point where the money is spent and then they're saying, "I told you so."
Yeah.
So it's certainly a lesson to be taken from. And we still have a flood problem.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually had a whole hearing item yesterday on flood zone 9. I think there's a lot of lessons learned, as I mentioned. You know, this organizational assessment that we're undertaking is specifically looking at what has happened in flood zone 9, what's working, and what do we need to do in the future to avoid those, tar pits, that really have bogged us down over the last 30 years. It's not like that everywhere. I mean, zone 9 is a little bit of its own thing, and there are also some themes in terms of our execution, our communication, our collaboration with community, our timeliness. So, I mentioned, do we adapt the flood control district, and you should also know that, the way it is today wouldn't work, with the existing structure and ethos that we have today. We're going to have, and so that's one option. But if that was the option that was selected, we essentially need to do a start over.
Yeah. We have one more slide, and so let's let Derek get through his last slide, and then we can have more general questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one was on leveraging local and state efforts. So and this really speaks to this group. How can the county use the many nonprofits in Marin to leverage county efforts to address climate impacts? How can the county maximize assistance from the state of California to help address climate impacts in Marin? And so part of that is first things first, first who, then what, so I first need to put together the team, get the right people on the bus, and I get the right people on the bus, then I can get to the partnerships. And, we are, walking into this room, and the conversations that I've had with many of you before today gives me a lot of hope about how we can collaborate in the future. And I think there's, some examples, and I'm really excited. We have schools here today, because they're a key part of our work. Young people, probably more than any demographic, are asking themselves, what world have you left for us, and what are you doing about it? And so, it was a little bit of tongue in cheek about, you're our only hope, but it's actually true to some extent. And but I think, getting down to more tactically of what nonprofits and community-based organizations can do is on the mitigation is, resilient neighborhoods, drive clean Marin. What can we do? Continue to promote those behaviors. Our Marin Carbon Project and our Carbon Cycle Institute. I did a lot of that work in San Luis Obispo. Like Marin, we had nearly 30,000 acres of open space. And so we did a lot of carbon sequestration with a lot of regenerative ag. We were fortunate to have Cal Poly as a partner in agriculture. So we were able to, some of my folks, lectured and taught in those programs, and they said, "Hey, Derek, we're happy to come up here." Marin has been a leader in regenerative farming and carbon sequestration, but there's always more work to do. In adaptation, the ground zero for sea level rise is the Canal District. It's the most vulnerable area. I personally think that the interventions are going to be needed in the Canal District. There was an article in the New York Times a couple weeks ago about Venice, Italy. I encourage you all to take a look at that, of what Venice is doing. But if people believe that the government's going to swoop in and build levees and locks and systems, it's really, that wasn't their approach. And so if you take a look, you'll read what they've done. Singapore is some example. If you want to look at an example here in the United States, you can look at what New York City did in Governor's Island and down at the Bay of the Hudson, which was, of course, ravaged by Hurricane Sandy, and they had to rebuild the whole island and then think about climate adaptation in the future. Some other areas are, working with us with the Slow Climate Coalition. We got a lot of grants and a lot of funding from private foundations, and I should say we're really fortunate to have the Marin Community Foundation that has this as one of their priorities. So speaking of alignment, they recognize that this is a piece as well. And so partnering on grants, planning, design, outreach, you can all be spokespeople and better spokespeople than frankly the government can on these programs. And then some other areas is, helping us on permit streamlining and other actions that can benefit, Marin County. So that's just a sampling. I put folks in this room in touch with a colleague down in San Luis Obispo, how we use the Slow Climate Coalition. It was a group of professors and also practitioners and just a lot of community activists that really became a force multiplier for the work that we did. And I think that's really the role that this group play.
Great, wonderful. So one quick thing before you ask. So I'm sure somebody's going to ask this. So the recording of this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be up on YouTube in probably 2 or 3 weeks.
Great.
So people who want that will have access to it.
Yeah, and I have a couple of comments about folks on Zoom. There are a bunch of comments in chat that we're not going to be able to, probably not going to be able to get to. I raised a couple of them and recognize some folks.
If you want to send those to me, I'll follow up.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And secondly, for folks on Zoom, we got your feedback loud and clear about the difficulty of hearing some people in the room. We have 25 people in the room and a larger number who are on Zoom. And so we're going to do a rethink about how to improve the sound quality of for folks speaking in the room, so people on Zoom can hear. So I'm going to switch from that to something very different, which is I was quite fascinated by you saying that you were chair of the board of 3CE and also chair of operations.
So I was chair of the operations board. So that governance structure was a little different. So there was a policy board of board members and essentially, so it was mayors largely and board of supervisors members, and they largely did all the policy and the budget. I think they met 1 or 2 times a year, but all the operations board, I met probably 2 times a month, and we were doing all the transaction, buying all the purses, developing the rebate programs. And so there was a direct conduit for me as someone who was implementing policy on the ground to the programs that we were developing. So it was just a different governance structure that I frankly thought worked pretty well. And then we would then bring things to the policy and board, and so I'm trying to figure out, work with President Sackett's office of what can we do as a region, and maybe some of that work is happening today with 3CE, but there's just a better conduit.
Okay, and you should know that there is a group of us that have been following MCE very closely. The consumer charge aggregators are potential deep pockets, and so funders of activities at the local level, and MCE is further along in getting to a healthy day's cash on hand, further along than 3CE. And MCE now has over $500 million in reserves, and yes, there are reasons for having such a large amount, but there are also possibilities for funding for local jurisdictions for various mitigation initiatives. So can you just say a little bit more that the local managers had a good deal of impact on 3CE's operations?
Absolutely. So we did all the transactions on power purchase agreements. So, I negotiated those with our executive, worked on strategy, worked on, our grant programs, worked on our reserve levels, was constantly monitoring rate volatility, what was happening in the energy markets, making sure we were hedging against that, understanding where we were investing our big corpus of dollars to make sure that it was aligned with our values. So you had a group of practitioners who were really tactically involved to make sure that there was member input and oversight over a lot of important programs that I think a lot of us were promised when we joined this organization. And so there was inherently a tension sometime between, the grant programs, and rates, in terms of, and we, 3CE, we survived the 218 challenge, which is a challenge on the constitutionality of the funds and whether or not we could use those funds for greenhouse gas reductions and electrification. We survived that. So we were testing a lot of different areas because, we were able to be bold, and we had essentially people who, like myself, it was, I'm passionate and this is my background, and so, this was my level of expertise. And so I could be really a thought partner and push our county executive, or excuse me, the 3CE CEO and the staff, constantly. And it was that kind of push-pull really made us better.
Yeah, it sounds like a terrific model for local influence on what could be a very important JPA.
It has a lot of my insight. I don't know. I mean, I can't sit here today. I haven't met any of the MCE.
That was my question.
Any
conversations yet?
Not at all, so that's been really fascinating.
Yeah,
that I
yeah.
had
Such a
no
major player.
contact whatsoever. And that's
Going
probably
on.
on me. I should have reached out and made contact, but at some point, yeah.
Maybe not. I will say this, that we followed Sonoma Clean Power, Peninsula Clean Energy, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and AVA pretty closely. And we're going to expand the CCAs that we're looking at to 3CE to look at your history, but there's subject for some very interesting discussions.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the future.
And, and largely, that's the shift in the, my hope is with the structure that I laid out with the shift to county executive is, today, probably 90% of my time is tactical, probably less than 10% is strategic. I'm hoping to shift it. So most of it is strategy, and that most of my time is outward facing. So I'm more community focused, in alignment with the board, who's, doing the policy work, so that I can be their conduit to the community and making sure that we're translating the community needs, hopes, dreams, expectations into something that is being operationalized. Right.
So we've got 5 or 10 minutes for questions if you're
Absolutely
still good.
Yeah.
And so Bill Cole.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that the Marin Biomass Project. I don't know if you've heard of it. Okay. I just wanted to say that it will be out in this fall, and it's a major project in California, here in Marin, looking at utilization of biomass, utilization of biomass pathways. And it's got a lot of climate implications because we've done some serious work on looking at the question of pathways that are efficient from the point of view of economically efficient, and also efficient from the point of view of greenhouse gases. I'm just saying you're going to be seeing that. We're going to be talking to you about it. And it's well known, in the office of, in the supervisor's office, but I just wanted you to know that if you didn't have enough complication, this one will come to you, and there's some really, very innovative ideas in it and a lot of problems, and I just wanted to alert you to it.
Great. I encourage you folks, if you haven't been down to the slow digester, you know, to go down
Which
there.
one?
The slow digester that's down in San Luis Obispo, you know, which was a.
Oh, yeah, and some of this has been part of this project.
Good, that's great, because they, you know, that was a conglomerate of a Japanese and Swiss firm that we brought in. And, you know, it's been transformative.
So we have a question from another Marine Conservation League board member, Kate Powers, and then we'll get to you, Bob Archer. Kate?
Thank you. It's nice to learn more about you, Derek. I just in terms of adaptation, I hope that the county, in addition to Botheen Marsh and Richardson Bay, will take a renewed stab at political will and coordination down in Marin City. Caltrans recently hosted a public meeting about putting in an additional culvert there, and it feels like there's still opportunity for the county to lead the coordination of stormwater infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, including Highway 101, and some changes there, but also emergency evacuation. It feels like the community is still feeling unheard, and I just wanted to draw that to your attention. But also I wanted to mention to this group that on on August 6th, San Francisco Estuary Partnership, James Muller and Ellen Plain from SFEI will be coming and talking about some exciting planning in terms of adaptation about the Novato Creek Baylands strategy, and has been working with Robert Leventhal of the county and also Barbara Salzman of Marin Audubon. So I hope those of you who are interested in adaptation will attend that meeting as well. Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks.
So first, thank you for those comments, and, you know, and I've been here 15 months now, so I've learned a lot. I don't know everything. It's going to take me a long time. I tell people, you know, people remember Windows 95 when you had to defrag your hard drive. I've had to essentially defrag my hard drive, you know, moving to Marin. And so I'm trying to fill it as quickly as I can with names and so partnerships and information, and that's really helpful. You know, we're fortunate, you know, our congressman was able to help us in Marin City. We have a $30 million grant with the Army Corps of Engineers. They're taking the lead on flooding issues down there. I hear you on the question of the Marin City detention basin, and, you know, how do we funnel water through to the bay through Highway 101. There's some sensitivities that we're paying attention to from Marin City. You know, that was one of the reasons why the Board of Supervisors supported the recommendation to create a county manager for Marin City, so that we have someone who can. We're going to now be sending out a newsletter to Marin City, information, coordination, communicating on all these complex flood control issues. I mean, I can still remember being a little small child around the table with my grandparents, and they were talking about flooding in Marin City, and this was like early 1970s. So we haven't made a lot of progress, but I think we're on the cusp of doing some stuff. But you're right, we need to do a better job of engaging.
Bob Archer.
Thank you for all your undertaking. Affordability is a huge issue here, California, across the country, particularly in electricity and energy. And you indicated that you want to be policy thought leader and practice leader for climate for others. Have you included in the new structure, or do you plan to do cost benefit, cost effective analysis of the existing programs going forward and the proposals in a systematic way, which is critical for whether or not they become relevant for other jurisdictions or not as well.
Great question. That's really built into who I am, and I think that will be part of the work of the new climate director to understanding of, are we making the investments with the lowest amount of investments and the highest, amount of greenhouse gas reduction, really at the end of the day. And that was what drove all of the policy and maybe the 3CE did I talked about, but also the programs that we designed. We said, where can we get our biggest reduction for our buck, so to speak? I don't want to use bang, but biggest reduction for our buck. And so that will be part of what my expectation is of the new director, and working with Dana and her team to make sure that we're right sizing our incentives and other programs so they're doing just that. And we need to make some adjustments, we will, or if there's new programs we need to invest in, I'll certainly have the will to go to the board or go to 3CE board and say, hey, we need your help and support.
Go ahead.
So, I
Rebecca.
appreciate, for folks on Zoom, this is Rebecca Schwartz-Lesberg. I appreciate on a previous slide, you had referenced to SB 272. I do come from more of an adaptation background, and so I'm curious, is the county already engaged in an adaptation plan that's consistent, like in implementation of SB 272 and the regional shoreline adaptation plan? And sort of like as a tangent to that question, one of the other hats that I wear is with the San Francisco Bay Migratory Bird Joint Venture. We worked really hard to make sure that the habitat goals of folks working in the Baylands were baked into BCDC's RSAP. And so I was just wondering, is that falling within this team, and how is that work going forward?
Great question.
Derek, you might
I'm gonna
summarize that real quickly or restate it, just so some of the people aren't hearing it all that clearly.
So what I heard is, are we baking in some of our biodiversity, and also thinking into our BSAP and other efforts that we're undertaking. I'm going to phone a friend. I see Chris Chu is here. So Chris Chu is probably the best person, since she's been at this game longer than me, and she could probably give you a much richer answer.
And I got
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi, folks. So, yeah, we are definitely aware of SB 272 and have been coordinating with our cities and towns around how we plan to complete that work. We have some of our communities that are out ahead, and so we'll be looking, as we form this climate team, to think about how we do this. We have all of the unincorporated county areas to manage for us and complete an RSAP for, so we are definitely in communication with BCDC, but also, again, all our local jurisdictions around that. I think we've shown a commitment to doing and really being focused on the nature-based, while also, as a county, managing a lot of the kind of more traditional gray adaptation methods. So I expect we'll continue to really be focused on kind of the green nature-based adaptation options as part of that RSAP adaptation planning, especially as we do kind of that short to long-term resilience planning through the pathways requirement in SB 272.
Jody?
I just want to make a comment, which is just, I really appreciate your community-facing approach. For those of us in the trenches who've been here a long time, we really need this kind of leadership, enthusiasm, and support. So I just want to thank you very much for that. We really need it.
Bill Carney?
Just kind of to reinforce that, I think in this room on the screen, a real powerhouse of thinking about climate and solutions. And I think your ability to reach out would be really augmented by engaging with the folks in this room as you've done this morning. So I really do appreciate that greatly. Look forward to working with you.
And I would just add that, county staff has been tremendous to work with on a number of issues. Dana and Mark have been talking to us regularly. Chris Chu has been any number of meetings. And so while I echo both what Jody and Bill said, about, you're reaching out and you're outward facing. I do want to say the county's done a great job working with us in the past as well. Yeah.
And I appreciate that. I think, we are, along the way. I mean, for me, relationships and thought partners, I mean, we're gonna have natural areas of agreement and natural areas of opportunity where we're gonna have perhaps differences. I would ask that, one thing that we try to do is, I don't love this in the sense of we need to fall in love with the problems sometime and not the solutions. So, focus on that we're all trying to work towards our same objective, which is a sustainable and resilient Marin. And, how we get there and, et cetera, I think, that's where we can really benefit from all of you and understanding sometimes we're going to be able to work with you 100%. Sometimes we're going to say great idea, not now. And sometimes it's great idea and we need to focus our resources in a different way.
Yeah, well, great. Well, just certainly on behalf of all of us here, thank you so much for coming and meeting with us. And it's exciting what you guys are planning. And we're really looking forward to that. And we also are going to want to have a good discussion with you about the CCAs.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that.
Looking forward.
Yeah, absolutely looking forward to how I can, support that. And, I certainly want to be respectful of what there is today. Yet at the same time, want to make sure that MCE, we were one of the founders of it. And so make sure that it's adapting, right? I mean, it was the first in California and it paved a lot of the way for a lot of us who kind of fell in their slipstream. And I think it's always important for organizations to always keep, and looking at itself and saying, are we adapting to the need, given, the mandates of the organization?
Yeah, great. Well, thanks.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we're at the end of our time. I want to again thank Derek. The county is lucky to have recruited him.
Yeah.
And just tell folks that there is no meeting in Climate Action Working Group meeting in August, but there will be a meeting on September 17. And again, Jeff St. John from Canary Media will be the lead speaker. And I can tell you folks, we've met him, we've talked with him at length. He's a font of information and it'll be a fascinating meeting.
Yeah.
So with that,
I think we're done.
Yeah.